Welcome to the Texas Talks podcast. I'm your host, Brad Swale. Today, I'm joined by Todd Staples, the president of the Texas Oil and Gas Association. Mr. Staples previously served as the Texas Agriculture Commissioner, as well as a Texas state senator and representative. Mr. Staples, how are you?
I'm doing super. Glad to be with you today.
I'm excited to be talking to you. It's a real pleasure. So I gave a real brief intro about you, and I say brief, but president of TexOga, as well as a Texas state senator and a representative. I mean, there's a lot hidden in those few things that you've done. Those are big things. Can you give us a little bit more background about you and the Texas Oil and Gas Association?
Sure, Brian. Well, I've been fortunate to serve my community and our great state in various capacities. And, the one thing about Texas, every Texan matters. Every Texan has a strong opinion about our state, about the direction that we should go. And so getting to interact as state rep, state senator, and then elected twice statewide as our state's agriculture commissioner has given me a real insight. Fortunately, or unfortunately, I pledged to visit all 254 counties, Brad, in our state. It's a lot easier to say you're going to do it than it is to really do it. But I'm proud to report that mission accomplished, and I've been to all 254. And in the heart of every community, there's a call for jobs, there's a call for growth, there's a call for economic development. And I can tell you that Texas Oil and Natural Gas has been answering that call in communities, because you don't have to be in the middle of the oil patch to benefit what oil and gas does. TexOga, like we like to call the Texas Oil and Gas Association, is a little over 100 years old. We represent about 90% of the crude oil and natural gas producers in this state. We represent the companies that are responsible for a vast majority of our state's pipelines, a vast majority of our state's refining capacity, LNG facilities, service companies. We represent mom and pop companies to some of the biggest companies in the world, and all of them are working hard to deliver for energy security for Texas and America.
Now, of course, Texas is certainly known for its oil and gas and energy sectors. And you've been to, how many is it, 254 counties?
Seemed like 312 at the time when I was doing it, but all we have
I would have guessed more than that, but yeah.
Yeah, 254, and I've been to all of them.
Is there some, does the Texas oil and gas industry, does it touch every single county?
Its impact reaches every single county because of what we do funds roads and schools and first responders and our universities and much, much more. But the production is not in every county in Texas. There probably, I don't know, Brad, that's a great question. The last time I checked on that, we might have had production in half of the counties in Texas. That may be overstated somewhat, but we have pipelines that move that product from the production areas to the processing areas to the refining areas. And then you have pipelines that move that to the populated areas of Texas. And then you have terminals that takes it the last, where trucks take it the last few miles to your neighborhood convenience store. So I can definitely say the impact of Texas oil and gas does reach every Texas county. And to a large extent, there's activity of some sort, whether it's delivering gasoline to that last mile to get to you as a consumer.
Yeah, for sure. And there's obviously storage containers all over the place. That's not just the extraction and the sale, but there's a lot of, I think it's the what's it called? There's a term, midstream. There it is. Yeah, midstream people as well. So, speaking of funding all of those things that Texans need and rely on, first responders, education, everything. My understanding is that the Texas oil and gas industry had a banner year in 2024. Tell me about that.
It was a record-breaking year, phenomenal, really. In 2023, we thought we hit the height for a while and it would go back down. But remarkably, the 2024 number is almost $1 billion higher than it was in 2023. $27.3 billion, Brad, paid in state and local taxes and state royalties. This is a huge number. It's about $74.8 million a day that goes toward funding those roads and schools and first responders and universities that I mentioned. And remarkably, that $27.3 billion is greater than the tax revenues collected in 34 different states from just one industry. And ours, it's larger than
Yeah.
that of 34 states tax revenues that are collected. So it's a really big number, and it is having a big impact on our great state.
Yeah, for sure. So, you mentioned some of the benefits from school districts to first responders. Is there what's the breadth of how this tax money is used?
Well, first of all, before we can get it distributed, it employs about 492,000 Texans had a job last year because of this industry that paid on average a little over $128,000 a year, which is substantially higher than the other private sector.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's a big number, and those are just direct jobs, Brad. That doesn't even include the indirect jobs because of the activity in the oil field, which you combine that, then you get almost a million four to 2 million, depending on what all you count and how you do it. Different economists look at it different ways, but those are really big numbers, and that impacts these families and their lives, and it benefits the communities in remarkable ways when you have that level of wage earners that are earning. So I think that's a big number I wanted to be sure not look over here today.
Oh no, I read that 128,000 is the average salary, and I thought that is, well, I mean, that's pretty amazing, honestly, especially for that many that many people being employed, over 400,000 people making that much money on average is remarkable for sure. That's
And
great for the Texas economy in so many ways.
it adds billions because the 27.3 number that I mentioned doesn't include those wages, right? It doesn't include office buildings that are here because they're housing these headquarters of these companies, and it doesn't include the buildings out in these rural areas where this production is occurring. It doesn't include a lot of the rolling stock because there's classification codes at the comptroller's office that you use to try to amass this data. And so, you and I don't know if it's an oil and gas company in that 50-story building or if
Yeah.
it's a finance company or an insurance company. We don't know that. And so you can't even add up all the real things that this industry does for this state. And to your question of where does it all go? I've got some great numbers. School districts receive directly $2.9 billion. Counties where these oil and gas activities are occurring received a little over $1 billion. The state has the permanent university fund and the permanent school fund, and these at the permanent university fund funds the two of the school systems that are benefited, and then the permanent school fund benefits all school districts. But those institutions received 1.5 billion and 1.9 billion dollars respectively. And Brad, the permanent school fund in Texas is now the largest endowment in the nation, thanks to Texas oil and gas, bigger than Harvard. If that gives you an idea of just what level of playing field we're really on.
Well, so we got a lot of money there. That's good that we have that for the students, and given the priorities of the Texas legislature coming up, I that's good that we do have it. However the winds blow on that issue, it's there. That's good to know.
That's right, because when I said those 34 other states, there's probably not a state in the union that wouldn't trade places with us to have that level of economic development. Right? When I first graduated from Texas A&M, it was in the mid 80s, and pretty soon thereafter, we had some really hard times in this state and in this country. Manufacturing declined significantly. We're all focused on economic development, how to grow your communities, and having those jobs and having that income is huge. A couple of other sources that are very meaningful to Texans: about $3.1 billion was dedicated to the state highway fund. And this is on top of what we pay as consumers at the pump that goes to fund highways, that's federal and state taxes. These are just direct taxes from the oil and gas industry that the legislature and voters dedicated to the state highway fund. And then yet another 3.1 billion was dedicated to to the rainy day fund, also called the Economic Stabilization Fund, which is essentially the state's savings account. And there's been a lot of good things over the years that's been funded out of that rainy day fund: retired teachers, hurricane recovery, roads for counties in certain areas, and those types of activities that's
Yeah.
been funded. So it's certainly a lot for sure.
But yeah, I mean, those are some big numbers. Absolutely. Can you just real briefly, we talked about the record breaking year that y'all had. through taxes and royalties. Explain the royalties just real briefly.
Yeah. So the state of Texas is different than a lot of other states. Most of our lands are either privately owned or we have some state-owned lands. And so the state of Texas has mineral interests that are dedicated to the Permanent University Fund or is managed by the General Land Office or that the Permanent School Fund the proceeds may go to. And so those are state royalties is essentially a tax on a company that's producing on that land. In other words, if you have land, you may give it to me to produce the minerals off of that,
Yeah.
and then you get a royalty that's paid from that company to you. Company takes all the risk, company takes the expenses, gives you the revenues from that. And that's where the state royalties come in. And that 27.3 doesn't include the private royalties that are paid to individuals like that may own mineral interest that leads those interests.
Yeah. So this growth that we're seeing in the records here, the taxes and the royalties and everything, is the industry growing? Is that what's happening? Is some of this inflation related? What's the story there?
Yeah, it's a great question. Inflation certainly negatively impacted every Texas and American family in a terrible way. A lot
Yeah.
of the actions of our government we know directly caused that inflation, but the bigger number for oil and gas is not attributable to inflation. And I can say that very clearly because we increased production. In fact, hit record numbers in 2024 in a lot of different categories. About 5.8 million barrels per day, roughly 44% of the nation's total oil production at our peak production level last year was from the Lone Star State. We produced about 34 billion cubic feet per day in natural gas production, which was yet again another record. Texas again contributes about 30% of our entire nation's natural gas production. We had records in refining outputs, refining inputs. We had record NGL, which are natural gas liquids, which is different than crude oil, or when I talk about marketed natural gas, that's dry gas. And
Yeah.
so natural gas liquids are yet another oil and gas product. So it's really driven by production and quite frankly, natural gas prices have been really low historically, and they were negative for over 40% of the time of the natural gas that was coming out of the Permian Basin. So that was a deflationary factor.
Yeah.
Even in spite of those deflationary factors, we hit all these new record production numbers and record tax paying numbers.
Yeah, that's great. I mean, it's really amazing that it keeps growing. I obviously Texas as a whole benefits from all of that. I want to talk about the sort of the state of energy in Texas. So obviously there's oil and gas, there's green energy subsidies, and there's questions about the reliability and the growth of that sector and everything like that. What's the future here? What does it look like here in Texas?
You know, you've heard the term energy transition probably as much as I have, right?
You've probably
Uh,
heard a little bit more, but yeah, I've heard it a lot.
a lot of people are talking about energy transition, and I think there's, words have meanings, and we all, might have a different interpretation of what that meaning is. I think there are some anti-oil and gas groups. There are some organizations, maybe some in the mainstream media that views energy transition as we're going to do away with oil and gas and we're going to have new energy sources. I think that's the way the expectation that somehow I will tell you that definition is punitive to every American family because right around 80% of the world's energy supplies come from fossil fuels today.
Yeah.
And that's when we've seen just ramp up in solar and wind and batteries here in the last few years. It's really only moved the needle by a few percentage points. And so when I think about things, I think about it, Brad, in terms of energy addition or energy expansion. We need more oil, more gas. We need more other forms of the right kinds of energy that consumers can rely upon to meet their daily energy needs. And so I'm people in the oil and gas industry are really not worried about these other forms of energy because many oil and gas companies are actually investing in other forms of energy. The hydrogen research is currently underway. Other forms of energy are as well, and oil and gas companies are investing in some in solar and some in wind facilities as well. But when it comes to electricity production, you need dispatchable energy. We
Yeah.
need energy that shows up all the time. So you're going to have an energy mix. I would just encourage us to think about this as how can we have a meet the needs of our economy and meet the needs of our citizens, meet our environmental goals, all while making certain we have affordable and available energy supply. And it can't be done without all in natural gas.
Yeah, so you brought up some interesting, the hydrogen energy as an interesting alternative that oil and gas companies are investing in, and that's certainly, I don't know what the timeline on that is, but from what I read, it's as a very much a layman, it sounds kind of cool. And I understand that the oil and gas that's dispatchable there when you need it, and I certainly don't want to see that go away. What are your thoughts on nuclear energy seemingly gaining momentum in this energy conversation?
I think that nuclear energy is one that has very significant growth potential.
Yeah.
I think Abilene ACU, Abilene University, and Abilene, that's part of the Texas Tech system. A guy named Doug Robinson, a private entrepreneur, was a big time in the oil and gas business, is funding some significant research there that's occurring. I think you've seen companies in Texas talk about small modular reactors, and so. I think the legislature this session is probably going to look at some resources to expedite the development of nuclear energy here in Texas. And so I think that's an area that is a consistent energy supply. It did too lose the ability because of during Winter Storm Uri, it lost some ability to put megawatts on the grid, just like most other electrical generation systems did.
Yeah.
But I think nuclear has some real potential.
Yeah. AI and data centers and certainly crypto are under the microscope. I think Dan Patrick tweeted out, I don't know, several months ago about the amount of energy use that's going to be needed to service those industries in the coming decade or so. And I'm curious as if you've thought about that. Is the growth that we're having with Texas with the oil and natural gas industry, can it keep up? It seems like something that not only in Texas but across the nation, certainly, people are concerned about the energy usage of those industries.
And a statistic I heard, Brad, that really solidified just how much more power we're going to need is on a typical Google inquiry. If you're using an AI inquiry, it uses 10 times the power than a typical, traditional Google inquiry that we used to do a few years ago.
That's so, I mean, it's so interesting. I don't even think about the energy impact of just pressing enter.
Right. Yeah, that's right. None of us really do, right? But when someone shared that number with me, this really solidified just how big of a draw that these new technologies are going to require. And quite frankly, these types of technologies are being used in oil and gas. This is the reason we can produce so much more. Keep in mind, our rig count has been declining significantly. We're less than 600 oil and gas rigs in our country today, and yet we're beating all production records, and it's because of these innovation and pioneering technological breakthroughs. But when it comes to AI data centers, I kind of think about it like this. Yes, they're going to use more power, but I want those built in the United States, not in other countries that may not share our same interest, right?
Sure.
Because that's significant technology that we want to have access to at our fingertips. And so many of those entities are saying we will build the power that we need. I think that's important from a responsibility standpoint, is to make certain that you're not just going in and edging out another power user, but you're bringing new resources to the table. That's something important to look at. But I think we need to make certain that we're welcoming these new enterprises finding a home for them. Preferably, my preference obviously is the Lone Star State, but making certain they are in America.
Yeah, I don't think whether it was your preference or not, Mr. Tables, I think they're going to be here for sure. Is
I just might say, I mean, the legislature could say, if you're X, Y, or Z, you don't fit our model.
yeah,
I'm just saying that because all the power is derived from the people that's given to our elected representatives.
absolutely.
And I want Texas to be open for business. And you're right, they are here. I totally agree with you. I mean, we know that they're here, and we want them to continue to come. Is my point. So
Yeah,
let's work this out where we can grow the resources that we need and have that growth, have those jobs, have that investment right here.
absolutely. Yeah, and I'm curious if there's, if you see how much of a of how much Texas oil and gas how much does that play into energizing these industries going forward? Quite a bit.
Yeah, I think quite a bit. We've seen some of our companies are doing contracts to actually build natural gas electrical generation facilities, that's using natural gas to put that electricity on the grid. And I think the fact that we have such an abundance of natural gas today kind of sends the message that, if you want to do business, we've got the resources here in Texas. The legislature passed a couple of things that I thought were pretty good. One is the Texas Energy Fund, which
Yep.
said we want to incentivize new dispatchable electric generation. And so we're seeing companies that are getting these incentives to build this dispatchable power. A lot of it's natural gas, obviously. We think that's a good thing. But they also looked at our transmission build out and did some things to expedite the transmission build out, because you can have power generated to put electrons on the grid, but if you can't move them to where they need to go, it really doesn't help you that much. So I think the legislature is being pretty smart in the way they look at this. You can't say that about government all the time.
No, you
I
can't.
know from personal experience of having served there, but fortunately, I think good things are happening in this space. And look, I don't think it's without concern. I don't think it's without challenges to overcome, but we're moving the right direction, and it's a very positive thing for all Texans.
Yeah. So I want to be respectful of your time. I know you have a hard stop coming up here in just a minute. I want to talk to you about the 89th Texas legislature. And I'm wondering if there's, hopefully there isn't any a whole lot of pushback on the things that y'all do, considering the amount of money that you guys put back into the state through taxes and royalties. But I wonder if there is, as we talk about energy transition and stuff like that, if there is significant pushback at the legislature. And then after that, what your goals and priorities might be for the 89th Texas legislature.
I think most Texas legislators recognize that oil and gas continues to be the heartbeat of our state's economy. I think they recognize that in Texas, we like to treat business as a partner, not as an adversary, as we
Yeah.
see some states treat business. So I think the underlying fundamentals are there. I do think there is an expectation of accountability on the oil and gas industry, which I will tell you, the members of the Texas Oil and Gas Association embrace. They recognize they have a fiduciary responsibility to take care of our air, to take care of our water, to be a good steward of our environment. And they're investing heavily to make that occur. Carbon dioxide emissions are down significantly. Methane emissions are down significantly. Less than 1% of the natural gas that's gathered in this state is either flared or used for some other purpose, which, restate that, 99% of the natural gas that's produced in Texas is used for a beneficial use.
Yeah.
I'll put it in those terms, is a good way to put it. So there's always a job to do. We try to be good neighbors with our landowners that we're partners with our mineral owners and royalty owners. And when it comes to this next legislative session, we want to be part of the solution. We know that Texas has significant water needs. When you produce oil and gas, you produce a lot of water with it that we call produced water, because it's just flow back water. Our companies have been recycling that water and reusing as much as they could in the exploration and production process, but there's more water than what we can use. And so we're looking at what needs to change statutorily in order to allow companies to put that water to beneficial use. for non-consumptive purposes, for watering crops, for putting back in streams after it meets the right water standards that are defined by the Clean Water Act. So we think we're going to be working with the legislature a lot in that space. We know there's been concerns about the number of orphaned wells in Texas. We too have those concerns. I can tell you that 80 to 85% of the wells that are actually plugged on an ongoing basis are done by private companies, but yet we have some companies that go out of business where those wells go into the receivership of the state, and then oil and gas taxes are used to plug those. We'd like to get that number down. And so we're looking at that. Electricity, we're going to continue to watch, and taxes are always an issue. I mean, we're bragging about the number of taxes we pay, but good gosh, these are a lot of taxes. Our point is, if the legislature is going to give tax relief, let's give it broadly and fairly to all businesses, all consumers, all entities. Let's all share and share alike in the way that tax relief is given. Those are kind of things we're looking at this next session.
Well, I wish you the best of luck with all of that stuff. I know that you guys you guys do good work, so I suspect that you won't need much of the luck that I'm giving you, but I wish it for you anyway.
We always need it.
Yeah. Well, Todd Staples with Texas Oil and Gas Association, is there a website or social media you want to plug?
You bet. Texoga.org. That's TXOGA.org. And obviously X and Facebook and Instagram, we're on all those spaces. So take a look at what we're putting out. If you have questions that aren't answered, we have a FAQ document on our website. Our energy and impact economic report that we just published can be found at texoga.org, TXOGA.org. And so take a look at it, look at that data, and give us your feedback. We'd love to hear from you.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much. I really appreciate you taking the time.
Good to be with you, Brad.